Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Malcontent Corner, the corner where I hope to enlighten your lives by sharing with you things I've learned in the daily walk of mine. This is going to be my final video for the year of 2023, and it's basically going to be a school session lesson regarding my Ford Explorer. So stay tuned, and I'll give you the deets after the intro. Welcome back everybody. So this is my final video for the year 2023. My God, where did the year go? I tell you, anymore I blink and it's like a year goes by. It's flying by so quick. Anyways, I decided to make this final video to kind of flesh out the year with regards to my videos and kind of clue you in on a problem that I ran into several months ago regarding my Ford Explorer. Now, for those of you that don't know, I have a 1995 Ford Explorer XLT. At the time of filming, that engine is original to the rig, and it has 355,500 and about 75 miles on it. So she's seen a lot of miles. Now, this particular rig is powered by the 4-liter overhead valve V6 engine. This engine is not to be confused with the single cam overhead valve engine that Ford released for, I think, the 97 model year, maybe 98. So what I'm putting forth here may apply to you, it may help you, there's no guarantees. Honestly, with regards to general troubleshooting, what I'm putting forth here is just a good practice anyways. Now, the problem that I have with this particular car started off probably about September. And what I would notice is if I was cruising at a steady speed at a light load, I could feel the engine surging a little bit. Not a lot, just a little bit. I knew something was going on, but other than that, the car ran fine. She had plenty of power, she started fine, she idled fine, everything else was seemingly fine. Well, about October, I went to take my wife shopping. We loaded up in the Explorer, and car took off fine, driving down the road. There's a fairly steep hill I have to get up to get to the grocery store. And my God, the car started running like crap. I mean, she was down on power. I was having to put a lot of throttle into her just to get her up the hill. And I wasn't even sure she was going to make it up a hill. Now, a quick check of the gauges didn't show anything wrong. Oil pressure was good. Water temp was good. So I didn't see anything painfully obvious. But we decided to come home and take another car to finish out the shopping excursion. Later that day, I come out, I fire up the Explorer. She starts up fine, she idles fine. I drive her around the neighborhood, she runs fine. Well, that's kind of weird. And what's even worse is it now seems to be an intermittent problem. Now, the subsequent weeks, I would drive it locally or just, quick trips. Car ran fine, didn't really seem to have any problems. However, one time I went to take my dog to the vet. The vet is about 20-25 minutes away, and everything's running good till about the 10-15 minute mark, and then the car starts running like crap. And running bad enough to the point where I'm not sure I'm even going to make it to the vet. Fortunately, I did. The dog is fine. But coming home, I then knew, okay, I'm dealing with an intermittent problem that will seemingly rear its head after about 10 or so minutes. I park the car, and the first thing that runs through my mind is, okay, let's get on the internet and see if other people have had this problem. Now, for those of you who live and die by the internet, I'm going to tell you, there's a lot of useful information out there. However, there's also a lot of crap out there. For example, one of the forums, somebody said they had an Explorer, it was missing. The number one response, or the first person that replied is, you probably have a cracked head. These cars are known for cracking their heads. Now, I don't know how you diagnose from an engine miss to that diagnosis like that without doing any preliminary work on it, but somehow somebody did. Now, of course, in looking through all of it, there was a myriad of just garbage out there. And there always is going to be. if you work in IT, you see it. You know, somebody says, hey, by the way, I have this problem. I've unloaded and reloaded the software. And somebody's like, did you unload and reload the software? It's like, yes, that's the first thing they said. If you actually read the thread all the way through, you would know they would do that. And of course, you got the solution of, oh, just format the machine and reload the OS, which is like, really? I mean, that's like saying, you know, my radio doesn't work in the car, just throw it in the car and get a new one, right? It's kind of ridiculous. But anyway, there was some useful information in there. I was able to kind of pull it out after enough hunting and pecking, and I'm going to put it forth here in a little bit in the hopes of making your life a little bit easier. Now, initially, folks, I'm going to tell you, I thought I had a bad fuel pump, and the reason for that is that if you watched the video I did earlier this year, I had a fuel pump problem with my Chrysler convertible. Now, in some regards, the Explorer was kind of acting the same way. Down on power, not running very well. Wasn't running exactly the way the Chrysler was, because the Chrysler was backfiring through the intake, and eventually she popped a check engine light. However, my Explorer at no point popped a check engine light. But otherwise, it seemed a lot like a fuel pump issue. Start the car, it idles fine. And like the Chrysler, I could drive it around for about 10 or so minutes and then it would start acting up. So I'm thinking possibly the pump is getting warm and getting weak and crapping out. However, there is nothing like real diagnostics to know what you're dealing with. So I ended up hooking a fuel pressure gauge up to the car. And just so you know, if you happen to have a 95 or 96 Explorer with this V6 in it, your fuel pressure should be between 35 and 45 pounds if your key is on and the engine is off, and it should be between 30 psi and 40 psi if the engine is running. I fire up the car, it's idling, and sure enough, it's pulling 30 psi. Well, great. So I know, however, that the problem kind of shows up after about 10 or so minutes. So I let the car run for a good 30 minutes. And at no point did the fuel pressure ever deviate from 30 psi unless I goosed the throttle. If I goosed the throttle, the fuel pressure would actually shoot up a little bit. And I believe that is to be expected due to the pressure regulator that I think is vacuum operated on these fuel rails. But otherwise, everything was running fine. So I'm like, okay, well, I can't really drive it around. I've got the fuel pressure gauge on it. I could drive it. I don't want to drive it just because. But what I decided to do was to power brake the car. Now, you should not do this unless you absolutely know what you're doing and you have a lot of clear space in front of you. But basically what I did was I put my foot down on the brake and I smashed the pedal down. Now, the RPM of the engine will go up to a certain point and it will stop there. That's the stall speed of the converter. In my rig, it was about 2,500 RPM. However, I noticed when doing that there was a slight miss to the engine. Not a major one, but a slight one. Aha, I thought, I'm onto something here. Now, of course, the fuel PSI on the gauge never changed. It stayed at 30 PSI. Even when it was missing, it was still at 30 PSI. So at that point, I pretty much ruled out the fuel pump. I could have had a funky injector in there. I'm not saying that's not a possibility, but I didn't really believe that was the issue because I would expect some deviation in the fuel pressure. However, in that gleaning of information off the internet, I did find one person that had a problem very similar to mine. He had a Ford Explorer V6 and it would start missing, and he replaced the fuel pump and this and that and something else, and ultimately what he ended up doing was finding out that it was the spark plug wires. In looking at my rig, I let, you know what, I bet you these are the original wires to the engine. And then I thought about it, and it kind of clued in on something. About 2 years or so ago, I had a problem in driving this rig where I would have a cylinder that would just drop out on me. It would just drop out. And then other times it would like light back to life, and it would be fine for a little bit, and then it would drop out. And then it would light back up and it would be fine. And I mean, this is over the course of like 5 or 10 minutes it was doing this. Now, back then I was thinking, well, maybe I got a funky set of plugs. So I ended up doing a set of spark plugs on the car and the problem went away. However, I'm wondering, well, maybe it really didn't go away. Maybe the problem was there, but when I pulled the spark plug boots off and jostled things around, maybe it seemingly took care of the problem at that time. Me thinking it's spark plugs, but in reality, it was the spark plug wires. Now, doing spark plug wires on this to me was basically a no-brainer. I mean, if you're dealing with old school cars, you're kind of used to saying, do a tune-up on it, and tune-ups would include plugs, wires, points, if you have a points car, cap, rotor, and condenser, right? That was a tune-up back in the day. So I'm thinking, I've never really replaced the plug wires on here. I picked up a set from Rock Auto. They were about 25 bucks at time of filming. And I went through, put them on, and sure enough, after firing it up and having a few missteps there, and I'll explain that in a minute, she ran fine. I power braked her up to, and once again went up to 2,500 RPM, but at no point did the engine miss. And I'm here to tell you at this point that the engine has been running fine since I put the new plug wires on. Yes! In my case, I lucked out. It was a fairly easy fix. Now, because it was an easy fix, I really didn't film it. There's really not a whole lot to film. You're going to watch me, replace wires? Not very exciting. However, I will give you a couple of pointers here, at least with regards to these 4 liters, at least the overhead valve 4 liters. First off, one of the things you need to know is the wiring sequence for the plug wires. Now, the smart way to do it is you replace wire for wire. That way, when you pull off a wire, you replace a wire and you don't end up miswiring anything. However, in my rig, there seemed to be some sort of loom on the driver's side rear of the engine that was tucked right up against the firewall. I believe the plug wires were in there and there were air conditioning lines over it. So I couldn't even see what was there, let alone get my hands in there. In order to remove the wires on the driver's side, I just diked the boot ends off of them and pulled the wires through. Now, when it came to the passenger side, it was pretty easy. I've got a coil here. I'm going to use it as an example. And let's just say this is the front of the car. So this is going to be the passenger side and this is the driver's side. If you think of it as the front of the engine and the cylinders being numbered, driver's side being 1, 2, 3, and the passenger side being 4, 5, and 6, the wires were really easy. You would sit there and this would be plug 4 or cylinder 4, this would be cylinder 5, this would be cylinder 6. It's sequential, really easy. So when I pulled the wires on the driver's side, I thought, oh, I'm sure they did the same thing. So this would be cylinder 1, 2, and 3. It's not. They made a change in the wiring sequence on the driver's side of the engine. And in case you're curious, here is the actual wiring diagram. Now, with that being said and done, replacing the wires is, again, pretty easy. But one thing I will recommend you do, if in case you get a set of wires and they don't come with it, but get yourself a little tube of dielectric grease. Now, the plug wires came with a little disposable packet of this dielectric grease. In my opinion, it really wasn't easy to work with and it wasn't enough to do the job, so I did end up breaking mine out. But what you want to do is put a little round of the dielectric grease on the boot that plugs into the spark plugs. You want to do that for a couple of reasons. Number one, it will help keep moisture and debris out of the contact between the plug and the plug wire, but it also will help aid in pulling those plug wires off at a later time if you should happen to end up needing to do such. Having the grease on there makes those plug wires come off a little easier, and if you've been banging around cars a lot like I have, there's always that seems to be that one spark plug wire that was glued to the spark plug. So do yourself a favor, spend a couple bucks, get a tube of this, and it'll make your life a lot easier. Lastly, I just want to say, is this the only thing that can cause this problem? No, it is not. In my case, I lucked out. It was spark plug wires. However, there was a gentleman that had a situation that apparently was very similar to what I described. The engine was missing. It would not pop a check engine light. He did replace the plugs. He did replace the wires. He still had the problem. It ended up being his coil pack, which is why I have a brand new coil pack I bought one on the off chance I needed it. I didn't need it because the wires took care of the problem. I could have sent this pack back, but I decided to hold on to it into my parts supply until that day I may or may not need it. But obviously, when it comes to an engine that's missing, there could be any number of problems. It could be plugs, it could be wires, it could be coil. It's almost like the old school stuff, right? But you could also end up with something serious. It could be a cracked head. It could be a burnt valve. It could be any number of things. I knew it was none of those in my situation because the engine would run idle fine. And if you have a cylinder that's dead, you'll know it right off the bat. However, with that being said, there's never any replacement for some good diagnosing. So take the time, do some diagnosing, and who knows? It might be something cheap and not the super expensive, well, put in a new engine solution. Anyways, that's what I have for you here on this episode of Malcontent Corner. If you're new to my channel, please hit the subscribe button. If you are not new to my channel, thank you for watching once again. And even if you are new, thank you for watching once again. I do appreciate you listening to me talk. I hope you found some value in this video. And as always, I appreciate you for just being here. With that being said and done, I do want to take a hot minute to wish all of you a Happy New Year. I hope 2024 treats everybody who's watching me now with abundance and health and blessings in ways we cannot imagine. With that, thank you. I hope to see you back again here next year in 2024. So until that time, please be safe, take care of yourselves, and we'll see you later. Ciao.